Tonight, the whole country stands with Liverpool, the Prime Minister's message to a city reeling from tragedy. 11 people remain in hospital as police say they arrested a man on suspicion of attempted murder, dangerous driving and driving while unfit through drugs. Also tonight, it was the landmark case that promised a sea change in how sexual violence and rape was viewed. But how much has changed in the wake of the conviction of Gisele Pelicot's husband? I speak to their daughter tonight, Darian, who tells me that serious sexual abusers like her father can never be rehabilitated. She says she supports chemical castration for some offenders. Scrapping the two-child benefit cap, restoring winter fuel allowance and tax breaks for marriage. Nigel Farage parks reforms tanks on Labour's lawn. How is he going to pay for it all? And the King in Canada, as our man in Washington, Peter Mandelson, bangs the drum for the special relationship with the US. Can the UK stay neutral in the sovereignty battle between Trump and Carney? All that and more with Kwasi Kwarteng and Ava Evans, who we hope to build our own special relationship with over the next hour. It's Tuesday, I'm Ali Fortescue live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Well, we start tonight in Liverpool and the reaction to the incident yesterday where a car collided with pedestrians as fans gathered in the city to celebrate Liverpool's Premier League victory. The King and the Prime Minister have today voiced their support for the city, with Keir Starmer saying that the whole country stands with Liverpool. In an update this afternoon, the police said 11 people remain in hospital in a stable condition. They also confirmed that a 53-year-old man had been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder, dangerous driving and driving while unfit through drugs. Well, our national correspondent, Tom Parmiter, has tonight's top report from Liverpool.
Before the chaos, the dark grey people carrier was moving slowly through the sea of Liverpool fans. The police have now revealed the driver is suspected of being under the influence of drugs. The vehicle ploughed into fans at the end of Liverpool's day of celebration. We're not showing the horrific moment when dozens of people, including children, were knocked over. The crowd then continued to attack the vehicle, trying to confront the driver. The police said they had no warnings that this would happen. They are satisfied, though, it is not an act of terrorism.
We have arrested a 53-year-old man from West Derby on suspicion of attempted murder, dangerous driving offences and driving whilst unfit through drugs. He remains in custody where he is being interviewed.
At the time of the collision, Water Street in the city centre was closed to traffic. But the security cordon on this side street was briefly lifted by event stewards who were trying to allow an ambulance to come through. It's then that the people carrier followed the paramedics who were trying to reach someone who was having a heart attack. That's how the vehicle got into such a busy area. It happened at the end of the parade that saw the city's waterfront turn red as fans saluted their heroes.
Not again. I thought it was terrorism at first, I really did, but not again.
8 years ago, Robbie survived the Manchester Arena bombing. It left him in a coma. Surgeons removed 4 pounds of shrapnel from his body. Yesterday, he was there, on Water Street, celebrating his team.
What was the feeling as you moved away from that chaos, really?
Scared, panicky, worried, because I said I did think it could be terrorism again. And we were worried it was going to be a second incident. This usually comes to more than once, or was there a bomb in the car? How could it have been stopped? I mean, what was a car allowed to drive through there? You thought the whole city centre should be no cars in it. Because every street, every side street was rammed. I mean, how a car's managed to get that far anyway? How was it allowed in?
The Home Secretary joined the city's mayor and police officers at the scene. Her sympathy echoed by the Prime Minister.
Scenes of joy turned to utter horror and devastation, and my thoughts and the thoughts of the whole country are with all of those that are affected, those injured, which of course includes children, their families, their friends, the whole community, Liverpool fans everywhere. And Liverpool stands together, and the whole country stands with Liverpool.
The Princess Royal visited one of the 4 hospitals that treated 50 casualties, including 4 children. Those that are still in hospital are recovering. In a statement, the King said, "It is truly devastating to see what should have been a joyous celebration for so many could end in such distressing circumstances. At this heartbreaking time for the people of Liverpool, I know that the strength of community spirit, for which your city is renowned, will be a comfort and support to those in need." The police now have more time to question the local man who was arrested, as they collate the evidence that will explain how this moment of triumph turned into such a traumatic ordeal. Tom Parmenter, Sky News, Liverpool.
Well, the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, has been visiting the scene of the incident this evening, and we've just got these comments from her in the last few moments.
So yesterday, the police quickly gave details of the man arrested. Within hours, we knew his nationality and his ethnicity. Is this because of the riots after Southport last year? And do you want to see details like this given again in the future to prevent misinformation?
Well, the police have an important investigation underway and they need to make the operational decisions. But we saw yesterday this real celebration of joy in the city turn into the most horrific incident. And so, as well as we all thinking of those who were injured and wishing them the very best recovery, we also need to say huge thanks to all those who responded, the police, the ambulance service, the fire service, and all those who were involved yesterday, many of whom I've met today, who did the most professional job to make sure that lives were saved.
And like you said, it was a big day. Hundreds of thousands of people were out celebrating here. Merseyside Police confirmed earlier that the car was able to get through a roadblock because it was following an ambulance. Is this a policing and local authorities' failure, do you think? How was a car able to enter what was meant to be a pedestrianised safe zone?
Well, I've spoken to many of the police, the ambulance service, the fire service and local authority who were involved in responding yesterday to the most horrific incident. It came after this day of celebration and joy in the city, and the professionalism of their response, the way in which they worked together to make sure that lives were saved and to be able to keep people safe, I think is hugely important, and we really thank them for that. The investigation, of course, is ongoing into what happened, and we need to let that police investigation take its course, and they have my full support in that.
The Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, there. Well, let's bring in our duo for this evening, shall we? Kwasi Kwarteng, the former Chancellor and political correspondent of Politics Joe, Ava Evans. Thank you both for being here this evening. Obviously, yesterday's events, shocking, still unfolding. Something that I have noticed, it does seem like the kind of transmission of information has been quicker than perhaps in the past. Do you think that's fair, Eva?
Yeah, I've got a lot of family in Liverpool and they're still in a state of shock. No one really understands what's going on, and neither do the police. And that's sort of how it should be for the first 24 hours after an incident like this. But yesterday, I learned about this because there were videos circulating online, and there were, there were a lot of comments circulating online. And look, it's entirely unhelpful the moment that an incident happens. The internet jumps on and decides that this must be a terrorist-related incident and starts speculating. It's unhelpful for the people who are involved, and it's unhelpful for the emergency services. And one thing that really worries me is that Merseyside Police felt that they had to put out a statement yesterday clarifying that this man was white to calm fears or supposed fears. I imagine that this was a terrorist incident. More white people were convicted under the Terrorism Act in 2020 than people of colour. And it's really frightening that terrorism has become synonymous with a person of colour, and that saying someone is white can calm everyone's fears.
OK, that's Kwasi, what's your take on this?
Look, I think the police had to give the information about the suspect very quickly, because the fact that they didn't last year in that appalling incident in Southport led to the kind of speculation that Ava's talking about. And I think people are rightly concerned when they hear incidents like this, that it could be a terror attack. I mean, I remember the Manchester Arena bombing. There are lots of incidents that we can all remember, which were terror-related, let's be frank about that. And it's natural that people are going to wonder when something like this happens, an appalling tragedy like this, an appalling human-driven tragedy, that it might be a terrorist act. And I think that's fair, that people need to know information about the suspect. And the police themselves actually said that they'd learnt a lot from what happened in Southport.
Yeah, and it does seem perhaps like there's been. I know you talked about messages on social media. It does seem like there's been less of a vacuum. We saw Steve Rotherham out quite quickly. We've seen police coming out with information about the man that was driving the car. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I mean, look, it must be extraordinarily concerning that after a situation where there is speculation that is building online, immediately after the Southport attacks, we saw in the following days people took to the streets because they'd been ramped up and they'd been made excited by online posts. You know, I think it calls into question whether, good that perhaps, almost immediately emergency services and the police and the government responded and put out statements. But perhaps we need to talk about regulating social media, because clearly it's extraordinarily dangerous and we could have had a situation yesterday that got out of hand too quickly.
So look, I think the genie's out of the bottle. I don't think you're going to be able to uninvent social media. And given that it's a huge platform and people can say whatever they want to say pretty much, you can expect that kind of speculation. And I think the police did a very good job in quelling that by saying who the suspect was. I think that clarified a lot of things. And the fact that he was on drugs also, I mean, it's horrific detail, but that actually clarified for many people what the situation was.
OK, thank you both. There's lots more to talk about. We will come back to you very soon. The shocking incident in Liverpool is, of course, sure to feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman and political commentator Tim Montgomery. Well, if there's one person and one moment that has become symbolic in the fight for victims of violence against women and girls, it is Gisele Pelicot, and it is this.
Je pense aussi à toutes les autres familles touchées par ce drame.
I'm thinking about all the families affected by this case and the unnamed victims in these stories who are often in the shadows. You should know we share the same struggle.
Gisele Pelicot there, outside court, having given up her anonymity so the world could see her husband too. We all know her story. Time hasn't made it any less shocking to hear a mother drugged and raped around 200 times over a 10-year period by her husband and 50 other men he invited into their home. But the story didn't end outside that courtroom in Avignon. It didn't end with one woman, no matter how much of an icon she became. This is a real family. You can see some of them there, a mother, a father, 3 children who said they had a normal childhood. Today, we've spoken to Caroline Darian, Dominique and Gisele's daughter. Her pain didn't go away that day, nor did the problem of abuse against women. Shame must change sides. Those were the words Gisele Pelicot said outside court that rung out around the world. But words, no matter how powerful, come up against the reality of actually getting things done, the reality we're seeing in this country of resources, capacity to actually deal with offenders. And as we debate that, surely if anyone has a voice that is worth listening to, it's the daughter of not just the survivor of the biggest French rape trial in history, but also the child of her abuser. Here's our interview with Caroline Darian. And a warning, it does contain some distressing content. Caroline Darian, thank you so much for talking to us today. I think first we do need to talk about the events in your life that have led you here today. And you, in your book, talk about the day that everything changed. Can you just tell us a bit about that day? This was the day that you found out what your father was doing to your mother.
Yeah, sure. It was 5 years ago this year. It was on the very beginning of November 2020. Monday the 2nd, actually. And I spent the whole day working from home because we're in the middle of the lockdown. And at the end of the day, my mom called me. It was about, 8:30, and she had to inform me that my dad was arrested. And she had also to to tell me that he used to drug her for raping her, for him, but also with some other strangers. And at the moment of my life, I really realized that I didn't know the one who raised me. And it was really strange and hurtful because, you know, precisely at this moment of my life, I've lost a part of me. I lost part of my foundation, part of my education, and part of my childhood.
Did you ever think your father could have been capable of something like that?
Never ever. You know, my father, we were a united family. I was really close from him. We were used to have a lot of discussion, doing a lot of things together. And I've never seen my dad staring at women or having, you know, bad habits or bad, you know, behaviors. So it was really, really tough to integrate that news, which is awful, because you have to cope with the fact that your father, my father, is one of the most important criminals over the past 10 or even more, 10 years or much more than that.
How do you feel now when you look back to the time before that day? You know, you talk about the good relationship you had with your father. How do you feel now when you think back about your childhood?
I'm trying to not think about that part of my life. It's to me, it's so far away from now. It's almost like it wasn't real. I mean, it wasn't a real part of my life.
But it was.
It was, but you know, it's one of the worst betrayal in a lifetime, because he was my dad. And I was, I trusted him. You know, the relationship between a daughter and a father, it's something really different and special. It's really behind me from now, right now.
You said in your book you miss your father and you find it hard to hate him.
It was difficult from the start, during the first 2 years, having to stop loving him as a father. But you know, through the investigation and all of this story, I really discovered what he was able to do. It was a long mourning process, but I think now I really looked at him differently.
We also know that there were photos that were taken without your permission. How do you feel about that now, and do you feel like you will ever find out the truth about what might have happened to you?
You know, during the trial, I was really hoping to get the truth, part of the truth, but he decided to stay in silence and even, you know, to lie, simply. I know something wrong happened. I know that I was sedated. I know, I'm convinced. There's no, question marks. For me, it's really clear. The real question behind this is the why. Why he did that? When you know that what he's able to do with my mom, his own wife, ex-wife, because now they got divorced, but when he said that it was his love of his life, you know, it doesn't make any sense. So I know that anyway, whatever, you know, he did, I know that it stopped looking at me as his own daughter. So there is a kind of an, you know, it's really difficult to look the truth, you know, as I had to, because for me, there's a kind of an incest relationship.
You had to look at those photos. Can you tell us as much as you're happy to share about that?
Yeah, you know, totally sedated, almost naked. I'm wearing a beach pant, which is not mine. It's the same on those two pictures, which were taken at two different places. One in my bedroom, in my old bedroom, and the other pictures, I don't even know where I am. I can't recognize, the venue, the space. It doesn't remind me anything. And I'm, positioned like my mom on every other pictures that were taken from her. So it was a shock when I had to look at those pictures, at the police station in the south of France, the day after the first phone call from my mom.
I should say your father has consistently denied abusing you.
Yeah, and he even said, during this trial that for him, he didn't remember having taken those pictures, but once again, it doesn't make any sense.
You said that you felt forgotten and invisible in the trial. What did you mean by that?
It's really difficult for me seeing that, even after 5 or 6 months, but I really realized during this court that it was first and foremost the trials of Gisele, my mom. I was hoping, to get the entire truth from Dominique, that I'm not able to call him dad, anymore. But I realized that, the qualification right from the start from my own case weren't done, in a right way. So I don't have enough evidence, even if I know that something went and he did something wrong. I haven't, any toxicological analysis, whereas my mom, had those testing. So I was hoping desperately hoping, being recognized as a victim, but I wasn't able to. Even the justice, the court, wasn't able to look at me as a real victim like my mom. And it's really difficult, but you know what? I'm representing most of the 90% of the victims in France when we talk about chemical submission, when we talk about, incest, when we talk about, sexual assault. Some cases like my mom doesn't exist. When you have all of this evidence on the table, it's not even 1%.
And you've also said before that in character you think you're very different to your mother.
We're totally different. But we're not in the same position. She decided to do her life with Dominique. He was her partner of life. Me, I didn't decide to get that further in my own life. I had his DNA in my blood. It's a tough legacy to bear on my shoulder.
Let's talk about the campaign that you're working on. This is about chemical submission, which is effectively the act of abusing someone when they're drugged. Tell me a bit about that campaign.
Yeah, sure. So we've been working for 4 years now. We've been launching this movement 3 years ago, which is now, became an association. And we're closely working with the government. And we've been just, working on a governmental mission with Sandrine Josso, one of our deputies. And she's a spokesperson of my NGO. And we are now, working on different kind of guidelines, being able to improve, all the healthcare support for all the victims. But also, there's going to be this annual awareness campaign in France, which is a real turning point. So this is part of the work that we are doing in France, working closely with the government. but we're also, working closely with the health professional because we need to train them, being able to identify and detect, those kind of cases when they have to. Sometimes they have to deal with. We are really working, driving awareness amongst the many about the symptoms, what to do, what you have to do if you have a doubt, where you have to go. This is, something that it's a big work on a daily basis, but I think we are making a change. It's a kind of a real make changer in France right now, and I know it's been recognized, by the public, the people, the many people. So there's a kind of a satisfaction from now, but still there are so many things to do.
You have such an important voice. You're the daughter of a survivor of abuse, but also the daughter of the abuser. I hope you don't mind me asking you a bit about a policy here in the UK, because there's been lots of debate about prisoners being released early, how we treat perpetrators of violence against women and girls. Do you think men like your father can be rehabilitated?
No.
In any circumstance?
Never, ever. Their journey, Dominique's journey is dangerous, is really, to me, it's too risky for that kind of profile, not doing his own sentence. And I know that he's probably going out, within 10 years for good behavior. But to me, there's a lot of chance to see this kind of profile acting once again.
And what about people who have committed maybe lesser crimes but still violence against women and girls? Should they be locked up, or should we be trying to rehabilitate?
I think there's always positive things to consider. I don't think in a prison or being in jail or during many years it's only the solution. Just need to get a caring process. We just need to get a caring process for that kind of profile. I also tend to think that, setting up a dialogue with those kind of people and getting a kind of a caring follow-up with them, it's really important.
So you do believe in rehabilitation?
I believe.
Not for your father, though?
Depending on who we're talking to.
The British government are considering mandatory chemical castration. So these are drugs to suppress sexual libido for some of the most serious criminals. Is that something you'd agree with?
Once again, for my dad, it's probably one part of the solution. Because, when you're at that level of crime, that level of criminal, there's nothing else you can do. So, yeah, chemical castration is maybe one part of the solution.
And can I also just ask, lastly, how's your family now? Do you see your brothers and mother? Is there some semblance of a normal family now without your father?
No, we don't have a normal family life anymore. I think Dominique destroyed a lot of things. So we are all trying to recover, trying to go on with our own life, but we are not the same family anymore.
Well, Caroline, I should say, is currently pressing charges against her father in France. Police are investigating. His lawyer has said that this was unsurprising and pointed out that in the original Gisele Pelicot trial, the prosecutors had said there was insufficient objective elements to accuse him of raping and using chemical submission on his own daughter. Right, let's get the thoughts of Kwasi Kwarteng and Ava Evans again now. We ran a lot of that, in a long version of that interview, because I thought it was very powerful to listen to. And I also wanted to hear her voice on some of the more domestic issues around UK politics, rehabilitation. She said very clearly she doesn't think people like her father can be rehabilitated. What did you think of the interview, Ava?
I'm speechless, which is not very helpful, is it really, for a television segment? But I mean, she has extraordinary strength to speak out, and wow, very impressive of his father's lawyer to even want to put in a statement. I actually think there's some hubris there in even accepting the right to reply. I worry a little bit about what she said there at the end about the chemical castration, because I think that, look, I'm not here to victim blame or anything like that, but I wonder if that gives. It suggests that there is an agency in these sort of horrific crimes, as if it's not a choice for a man to commit these heinous crimes. That if you can only accept chemical castration, that's because there's physically no other way of rehabilitation, which suggests to me that it's more of a involuntary act that her father did rather than being in complete consciousness.
I think Ava makes a good point. I mean, it was a horrific case, unbelievable in many of its details. But the thing that was particularly horrifying to me was the fact that he'd essentially invited, was it 50 people, 50 men, to commit rape against his own wife. And of course, that, it doesn't matter how chemically castrated he is, that individual is, the fact that he invited those people to do those crimes suggests to me that it wasn't just about his own warped sexuality. And I think that I don't think that would necessarily have worked or helped in that particular case. Now, there's a broader debate about chemical castration. I don't support that. I don't think it should be part of the legal system. Many prisoners of sexual crimes who've committed sexual crimes have said that they would want to see that, and it would have to be on a voluntary basis. I don't see that being mandated by a judge. And the other thing that she said that was, very powerful was the fact that she thinks that her own father can never be rehabilitated. And I think we've got to accept that as a society, that there are some criminals for whom rehabilitation could well be impossible. And we've got to deal with that and not just assume that every single criminal who commits horrible crimes in some instances can be rehabilitated. I don't think that's the case.
And it felt to me like her voice was really important, because so often we don't actually hear the voice of the victims. So often these people are anonymous, but we are actually hearing now from her and her mother.
It's extraordinary, if I may say so, it's extraordinary that given the trauma and the horrible offences that were committed by her own father and by the husband, it's extraordinary to me and shows immense courage on the part of the wife and the daughter that they've publicised their case. Well, the case was publicised, but they've actually lent into that and are using this, in the case of the daughter, to campaign on these horrific issues. I think that shows incredible courage.
And we saw Gisele Pelicot outside court, that was seen as such a sea change moment. She's become such an icon, but has anything really changed?
Well, I mean, they certainly displaced the shame. I think when we talk about cases of rape and sexual assault, I think that, victims are often portrayed in this sort of very, very shameful sort of demeanour. And with the two of them, there was power in their appearance, and that shame was really put back onto the victor, to the aggressor, which is exactly where it should be.
And the other thing that you mentioned was, we're talking about something that Sophy brought up at the time that I thought was really powerful, was that this was 50 different men. There was nothing really that united them. They were young, they were old, they did different jobs. That was one of the scariest things about this.
I think that said, I'm not an expert on criminology, but I think that suggested that it was more about a power relationship, that he was exercising power in a very grim, grotesque way.
As is all sexual assault, though.
It is, yes, but the fact that he brought 50 people to commit that crime, I think, puts it in a totally different category and suggests to me that, when we're talking about chemical castration, that isn't necessarily going to stop someone from wanting to do that. Now, it's a very unusual crime. I hadn't heard of anything like that before. But this is, chemical castration, I don't think, is the answer in that instance.
Thank you both. We will come back to you. Well, let's go to Washington now, where the UK's ambassador, Peter Mandelson, was giving a speech about relations between the UK and the US. Our US correspondent, James Matthews, caught up with him as he left and asked about the UK's trade deal with Donald Trump and his past association with Jeffrey Epstein.
Hi, Mr. Mandelson. James Matthews, how are you doing?
Hi, very well.
Nice to meet you. Tell me, how do you assess the UK-US trade agreement 3 weeks on? When will it be enacted, and when will British industry feel the difference?
Well, the priority is to protect those jobs that frankly were vulnerable as a result of the initial tariffs in our auto sector, steel and other sectors. And we've got an agreement to protect those jobs, to safeguard those industries, and they will be implemented shortly.
How do you assess its value, I wonder, 3 weeks after the agreement was signed, given that the tariff remains at 10%, which many would regard as too high?
Well, it's a 10% baseline. We've now got to look at some of the effective tariffs in different areas, and those discussions will continue. We've also got to look at the non-tariff barriers that in some cases are too many or too high. So this is part one of the trade agreement, and we're going to go on. We continue to negotiate with the US, and I'm pretty sure that the outcome will be very good for both sides, and that of course also opens the door to a future technology partnership between our countries.
On a different matter, sir, in June 2009, did you stay at the apartment in Manhattan of Jeffrey Epstein?
I'm not answering any questions about him.
He was in jail at the time for soliciting prostitution from a minor.
And my knowledge of him is something that I regret. I wish I'd never met him in the first place.
Why did you have an association with him? Because he was in jail at the time.
Why did many people meet him? He was a prolific networker, and I wish I'd never met him in the first place.
Peter Mandelson there. You're watching the Politics Hub coming up. Nigel Farage makes promises over some of Labour's least popular policies, pledging to scrap the two-child benefit cap and reinstate the universal winter fuel allowance. Is he parking his tanks on Labour's backyard? We'll discuss all of that next. Now, Nigel Farage has parked his tanks today firmly on Labour's lawn with a pledge to lift the two-child benefit cap, and he says he's going to reintroduce universal winter fuel payments. He also had a pop at the Conservatives, saying neither main party stands a chance of winning the next election. Well, our political correspondent Tamara Cohen caught up with him after that speech.
Nigel, you once argued for the two-child benefit cap. It was in your manifesto when you were UKIP leader. Now you want to scrap it. How have you come to change your mind about this? And what would you say to people who think you're, a shameless opportunist?
Because the cost of living has fundamentally changed since that time. Take energy bills, where we now have, in many cases, the highest energy bills in the world. And I do see we have a depopulation problem with British-born young babies. We're trying to fill that gap with mass unskilled migration. We have to do something long-term to sort it out. This measure, in overall financial terms, is a tiny part of government spending. If it helps young people who are not on big incomes to have families, big families, that's a good thing.
Well, as you can see, our chief political correspondent, John Craig, is with us, as well as our duo, Kwasi and Ava, are still here. We'll come to you both in a moment. But first, John, a cynic might say that is Nigel Farage being opportunistic here, jumping on Labour's U-turn over winter fuel?
Well, that's what his opponents are claiming. Mischief-making, they're calling it, Labour sources, and also opportunism. Of course, it's classic Farage. This time last week, Wednesday, in fact, last week, the PM, if you remember, teased Mr Farage for not being in the Commons statement over the Europe statement and then at Prime Minister's questions. And the Prime Minister made a gag about him being the first person to take advantage of the new E-gate policy. Well, that got a laugh at the time. But of course, whilst other ministers are either on the beach, the ski slopes, or wherever they go, it's mostly Tories on the ski slopes, I think. There up pops Mr Farage during the recess, blockbuster news conference, lots of eye-catching policies. And yes, of course, he's punching the bruises of all the embarrassing issues that, of course, is causing Labour such grief at the moment. Winter fuel payments, possibly the most disastrous thing Rachel Reeves has introduced, Labour's poll tax, some people are calling it, and of course saying that he'll restore it, possibly not for millionaires, but for most people who've lost it. Then also the two-child benefit cap, a policy brought in by George Osborne back in, I forget which year it was, but he brought it in. And of course, there was a rebellion in the Labour ranks over that. 7 Labour MPs lost the whip over it. Now the government seems to be panicking and saying, ooh, perhaps we will have a look at it. And Bridget Phillipson was saying that on Sky News today. He also talked about tax breaks for married couples. Now, the significance for this, of course, is that Mr Farage, along with Trump insiders like Elon Musk, are worried about the falling birth rate because they reckon that fuels immigration. Look at this. Here's the manifesto for reform last year. And in there, it does say support marriage through the tax system as soon as finances allow. A UK 25% marriage tax allowance. Now, of course, those pointy heads at the Institute for Fiscal Studies all say, you can't afford this. Ed Davies says it's Trussonomics. Kwasi knows all about that. And the IFS said up to £80 billion all this would cost. And Mr Farage, to be fair, when he was quizzed on that, did say, yes, I accept it's going to be expensive. How will they pay for it? Cuts, he said, getting rid of net zero, getting rid of wokery, all that sort of stuff, he says. Well, it's got him some headlines today in the parliamentary recess. However, I should just say, there's one poll, Reform are doing really well in the opinion polls at the moment. There was a poll by YouGov today. Who'd make the best Prime Minister? In actual fact, Sir Keir, whilst Labour are trailing in the polls, he came out much higher than Mr Farage. Sir Keir Starmer was 44%, Mr Farage 29%. So perhaps they like these policies, but perhaps they're not convinced that Mr Farage would make the best Prime Minister.
Very interesting. And let's bring the panel back in. I also saw some polling that suggests that more than 80% of Reform voters actually don't want to scrap the two-child benefit cap. So do you think this is going to chime with their core votes?
I think it's a very odd move for him because I remember when it was introduced. In fact, I was a backbencher. I voted for it. I think there was a perception then that why should people pay for kids that the parents themselves can't afford. And that was a fair point, I think. And what Nigel Farage is trying to do, I mean, it's obvious, it's opportunistic. He's trying to go after the Labour vote, the left-wing traditional Labour vote, while at the same time, a lot of his base is from the Conservative Party. So he's doing this sort of political cross-dressing. And I'm not sure that he's very convincing on that. I don't think, people remember him from 30 years ago, 20 years ago. He was always a sort of Thatcherite critic of the Conservative Party. So for him now to say, look, I'm going to spend more money on welfare than the Labour Party, I don't think it's very convincing.
What do you reckon, Ava?
I don't agree. I don't think he is going after the sort of vacuum left by Labour. I think he's going after the populist right. It's very Elon Musk. If you remember that tweet that he posted a few months ago, he said the low birth rate was the end of civilization. He's also running the Doge outlet, which is what Nigel Farage wants to do here, sort of cut wokery, and that's how he'll manage to spend all of this cash. He also spends a lot of time in his constituency, and he knows that his constituents need that two-child benefit cap. To me, it's just a hallmark of proper populist right.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, we did see in the locals that they can take votes off Labour as well as the Conservatives.
But I think that's what he's doing. I think Ava's right, and he made no bones about it. He said that it's linked with immigration. He's saying we need to have more of our people here producing children so that we are not so reliant on foreign imported immigrants. That's basically the core of his argument.
Which is an argument that's being imported from the US, right? It's sort
the
of,
US and also a lot of the right in Europe as well are saying the same thing. But I think at the same time, he's got those, what John called the pointy heads in the IFS, who are going to be looking at their spreadsheets and saying, how on earth is all of this going to be paid for? And that's where I think Farage will be under a lot more scrutiny. And I'm not sure he'll have all the answers.
Do you think
one thing he didn't promise to keep was the triple lock, of course, which Kemi Badenoch and Mel Stride have said is unsustainable. Now, if you're courting the pensioner vote, you might want to say, oh, yes, we'll keep the triple lock. But he did not say that.
Yeah, do you think there's an opportunity now for the Conservatives, Ava, to be the party that are tough on welfare?
I mean, I don't know how much tougher you can be on welfare. And also, if you look
it's obviously something that does chime with some voters.
Well, absolutely. But, we've had 15 years of austerity and we're living in de facto austerity still under the Labour government. And, every single time that there is a new cut that's announced, it polls terribly. Look what happened with winter fuel. Look what happened with not lifting the two-child benefit cap. Labour were just hammered at the local elections. I think people are really tired of cuts.
But I don't think the two-child benefit cap is that unpopular with the electorate. I mean, clearly the winter fuel payment
but it was
elimination.
A different time, Quasi. In 2017, when that was brought in, we were watching, quote-unquote, Benefits Britain on television.
It was,
we
before
had this sort of, but there was this feeling that people were taking money off of the state, whereas now we're in a totally different space.
I think people will have, some people, a large number of people will have problems with lifting the benefit cap because essentially what you're doing is encouraging people to have more and more children that they simply can't afford, and it's basically you're asking the state to pay for that. That is a political debate. I think with the winter fuel payment, which was extraordinary that Labour did that, I think he's got a lot more run room and a lot more ability to cause havoc there, and that's proved by the fact that they've already done a U-turn on it. I'm not sure they're going to do U-turns necessarily on the other, the benefit restrictions. They might do. But then, of course, they'll have a fiscal problem.
And John, very briefly, can you ever recover from a U-turn or a perceived U-turn?
Yes, I think there are arguments, of course. If we were Dennis Healy, when you're in a hole, stop digging, famous quote. But yes, in some ways, it's better to admit your mistakes, and they've got plenty of time between now and the next general election to sort out this mess. But of course, Mr. Farage will say, it was Reform UK that forced them into these U-turns.
That's right.
Thank you all. Very interesting discussion. We will come back to you very soon. You're watching the Politics Hub coming up. Whilst the King opens Canada's Parliament, Peter Mandelson talks up our enduring relationship with the US. So how does the UK walk the tightrope between its two closest transatlantic allies amid their bitter dispute over sovereignty?
I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. Do you fear a fourth indictment? Does your government owe an apology to the British home children?
Great to see you.
Does your government owe them an apology? The fact that they were intercepted, does that indicate a military weakness on the part of Iran?
No.
Free, wherever you get your news. There's no doubting the strength of this hurricane as it roars through. You can feel a devastating power. It had been a difficult night in a deadly storm.
Bang, bang. You can hear it hitting the windows.
Our houses are okay.
It's depressing. As bad as all of this is, it could have been much worse. Today, this land they call sacred is at the heart of America's electric car revolution.
To me, it's a sacred ground.
The white gold rush is a race that Biden doesn't want to lose. I've covered some of the biggest stories in the world. Donald Trump, 45th President of the United States, it would appear is about to learn his fate.
Escort coming out!
San Quentin houses America's largest death row. They rarely allow cameras onto the condemned block.
James Matthews, Sky News. I want to be treated equally like everyone else. It's one step closer to getting out, to getting off death row.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Mr. Trump, James Matthews from Sky News.
Hey, James.
We're diminished by claims that you're a racist.
Question?
Mr. Musk, has your ignorance and ego cost Ukrainian lives? Vladimir Putin calls you outstanding. What do you call him, sir?
He's from Sky News. He's from Sky News. He's entitled to ask me questions.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live. I'm live in Jerusalem.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Hello, welcome back. Well, King Charles has been in Canada to open the country's parliament. He spoke of a critical moment for the country amid that row that I'm sure you all know about with Donald Trump, who is claiming Canada as America's 51st state. Well, soft power has been in play quite a bit recently, and I think it is fair to say there were a couple of pointed remarks in the King's speech today.
Canada faces another critical moment. Democracy, pluralism, the rule of law, self-determination and freedom are values which Canadians hold dear and ones which the government is determined to protect.
Well, the King there, but south of the border, the UK's ambassador to the US, Peter Mandelson, we heard from him earlier, was talking up our special relationship with America. He spoke about our changing transatlantic relationship, praising Donald Trump's political instincts.
United States is the UK's closest defence and security ally. We must become less dependent on America while remaining inseparably linked to America, a distinction that I underline of critical importance.
Well, there you go. Let's bring our panel, Kwasi and Ava, back in. Two interesting examples today. I mean, are these two things reconcilable? The King talking about a relationship with Canada and then Peter Mandelson in the US talking about that relationship?
Well, it sounds that they're almost contradicting each other, but they have different functions. The King, I suspect, if it's anything like our state opening of Parliament, that speech would have been heavily influenced by the actual government. So, I mean, in our system, essentially the government writes the King, and in the former times, the Queen's speech, and then the monarch would essentially just read out what the speech was. So I'm not convinced that Mark Carney's government didn't actually have write the whole thing. That could have been the case. In Mandelson's case, he's an ambassador. What's he going to say? He's been sent to Washington to represent our interests. He's not going to trash his host. As an ambassador, he has to effectively suck up to the government that where he's an ambassador. So they are reconcilable, the positions, but obviously the messaging was very different.
It's tricky, isn't it? It's a tricky line to tread over.
I doubt that was signed off by the British government, that speech. But, yeah, I mean, look, King Charles has always liked to get rather political, hasn't he? He's made some comments before about certain wars. He's also made comments about climate change. I just wish that he would come out and just say something rather than leaving us to speculate.
So I don't know what the custom is in the Canadian Parliament, but I'm pretty sure that the Canadian government, would have had a lot of influence in terms of his speech to their Parliament.
Do you think soft power's worked recently?
I think it has. Sorry.
No, go for it.
I think it is working to an extent. I mean, the tariff situation, where essentially we got a 10% baseline, as Peter Mandelson said, and Trump is threatening 50% tariffs on all and sundry, particularly the EU. I think that shows that soft power can work. I mean, clearly we've had the discussions, and Donald Trump, for whatever reason, has decided to go pretty easy on us. So I think it can work.
Yeah. And what do you think, Ava? I mean, that letter we saw Keir Starmer handing over, I mean, that seemed to soothe things over, didn't it?
I think that we sort of need to listen to his niece, Mary Trump, who has been speaking in the last couple of days. And essentially what she's saying is you cannot put too much weight on a single event with her uncle. He's a very changeable man and he's sort of quite Teflon and, he will change like the wind.
Sure. I think that's true. But I think the letter was, I think it was Mandelson. I mean, it was so theatrical. And Donald Trump loves theatre. I mean, he's a reality TV presenter. And I think that sort of theatricality is what he loves.
And briefly, Kwasi, I'm interested to hear your view on the trade deal, because we haven't heard yet.
Sure. I think it was as good as we could expect. The one thing that Trump has been consistent on, and when we said he's changeable, he's been banging on about tariffs for decades. He's very much of the view that people are ripping off the United States. Foreigners, in his mind, are doing a number, I think he put it, on the US, and he wants to change that. And that's why he's going down this route. So given that, I think we've done quite well.
You could have always borrowed more, hey?
Thank you.
I think he is doing that anyway. I think he is doing that.
Ava and Kwasi, lovely to have you on the panel this evening on the Politics Hub in recess, but we've still had a very busy programme. Thanks so much for watching. Up next, it's UK Tonight with the latest from Liverpool. And then at 9 o'clock, it is The World with Gillian Joseph. Thanks so much for watching the Politics Hub. It's going to be me with you for the rest of the week in recess. Thanks so much for watching.